This is a 100-gram bottle, or 1/10 of a kilogram, of UV curing clear casting resin. I was provided this to review for free. They have not paid me for my review, so my opinion remains my own. So in the box, you get the light blocking black bottle with a dispenser that you have a little dispenser tip here, as well as the manual. I was pretty impressed with the manual. It includes an ingredient list with the sensitivity that you might have. Basically wear gloves and probably a mask if you don't have good ventilation. Tells you the general steps of how to use it. You want to use a UV curing lamp or daylight sunlight. Has a couple of tips for avoiding bubbles and so forth. So it's a pretty reasonable manual for this product. Alright, I have my mold here on top of my curing station just because I want to use this flat piece here to keep this guy from flexing so it'll stay flat. What we are going to be putting into this guy is a flour that I've previously dried out. So I have the flour out of my discant here, although I do need to make sure there's no discant stuck to the flour. Looks pretty good. I think I got most of it off. Just going to brush around a few places to make sure of that. And this flour has a stem that's going to stick out the back a bit, but that's okay. I can take that off later. Okay, so we have a flour, we have our casting area, and I'm in an area that is protected from sunlight, ultraviolet light. This thing says it has like a 20-minute cure time in sunlight, but I don't want to be accidentally exposing it to sunlight. And I am wearing eye protection and gloves. I don't have a mask on because I have a decent amount of air around here. Now what I'm going to do is try to coat the leaves before I put, or as I'm putting resin into my mold here. And so I'm going to allow the resin to flow down my leaves and flour and try to coat most of them to try to mostly allow air bubbles to get out of this before I put it face down into the silicone here. And so you can see I'm getting air bubbles here and there, and hopefully those will pop before this guy is placed face down into the mold. I'm trying to do a continuous stream so I'm never letting go and absorbing air back in. We'll see if I'm 100% successful with that or not. At some point I'm going to have to get more air into the bottle. But I'm basically just trying to get resin over the entire front surface of the flour and hopefully not have bubbles like that form. Before I place the flour down into the pool of resin I am gathering underneath it here. And 100 grams is not a lot, so I'm probably going to be using a lot of this bottle for this particular casting. Alright, I believe the front of the flour is pretty well done there, and I want to try to push this down quite far in. I have plenty of resin underneath it and behind it, so I'm trying to get resin to cover the entire flour. And this stem on the back will help me push the center in. The leaves, however, are going to have to kind of go in on their own. Now, I don't want it to touch the face of the mold, so I'm not too worried about that. Now, I do have a couple of bubbles here and there. And I'm hoping I don't have any bubbles trapped underneath the flower. So one thing they said was that using a 90% alcohol solution, you could spray this to try to remove bubbles. And I am not quite willing to test that right here. So I am going to poke a few of these bigger bubbles. Now that'll get rid of the big guys. And I'm also going to push some of these leaves down to try to make sure they stay underneath things there. And they said if I let it set for 5 minutes, some of these bubbles would go away as well. Now realistically, if you are a professional, you would have a vacuum pot where you could put this whole thing under vacuum and make all those bubbles pop out. But I'm not that professional. Now I am also going to do 2 layers. I'm going to do this layer, and after this layer is done, I'm going to chop off the stem and put a small layer on top of that, just so there's nothing sticking out the back. So if any of these guys were to stick out or anything, there'll be a little bit of resin behind it. Alright, now I can just open the garage door and expose this to sunlight, but since I have a curing station, I'm going to use it. We'll just pretend it's cloudy or nighttime or whatever, and we will just cure this guy. And I'm going to set it to 20 minutes. Yeah, I'll set it to 30 minutes. Why not? I'm going to set it to 30 minutes, turn that thing on, and let it cure. Okay, this has been in here for 30 minutes. Let's check the hardness. Oh yeah, that's nice and hard. Don't have to worry about smearing my pliers here. So I did that. Now I'm going to close the garage door so I don't have excess UV light in here. Alright, we are going to cover the place where the stem used to be and go out just a little bit. To level this guy. Alright, I'm just going to let that sit for about 5 minutes to give those last bubbles a chance to come out of it, and then we will cure that level as well. Alright, so I cured this for another 30 minutes, and it's pretty solid there. Now, you can look at it here and see it warped when it was curing. And that might be because my curing machine's a little too strong for it. Yeah, I could have kept it just inside of a window that had indirect sunlight and let the UV light cure it really slowly. But it did cure pretty well there, nice and clean. There's a little bit of bubbles, tiny little bubbles in there, but you know, if you had a vacuum pot, that would have gotten that away completely. I can see just faintly, barely a little area where the second layer went on to the first layer. You probably can't see that there. Alright, so that guy's fully cured up there. There's a couple of air bubbles, I think more in my second pour than my first, but if you had a vacuum chamber, that would get rid of all those air bubbles. It's nice and clear, hard. It did warp there. It's not flat like the mold is. It basically warped up. I think that was because the UV light caused it to heat up. I think if I'd left it just inside the house next to a window with a little bit indirect sunlight, maybe let it cure over a couple of hours instead of forcing it to go fast with the curing station, it probably would not have warped due to heat like that. But it did go very nice and clear, you know, so this is very clear. I'm quite happy with how clear that is. I maybe will put a layer of resin down here and then drop this in on top of it, just to see if I can get the bottom to be nice and level, but I may just leave it like it is. I didn't perfectly center it, and that's on me. I thought I'd centered it pretty well, but it's pretty obvious now that it is not centered. My flower also has some areas that look clear, and that's just the makeup of the flower petals there. They're still there, but they have resin kind of inside, super thin areas there. So I think this resin did what it's supposed to do. I think you play around, you know, vacuum the bubbles out, use a slower cure time, and you could get a really nice result with that.